Hi everyone, I'm Kieran and welcome to the Soil Your Undies educational checkpoint number 2. In this video we're going to be exploring some soil texture and particle sizes. So what do we mean by that? When we're talking about the texture and the particle size of soil, we're talking about the mineral component of the soil. So these are things like sand, like silt and like clay. When we're thinking about these different mineral components, we have to think about the size, because the size is really important for how well water can drain through the soil. Now, if we consider the size of a sand particle, for example, it's kind of like a beach ball. Sand particles are really huge compared to some of the other stuff in our soil. And if we imagine we've got a whole bunch of beach balls all stacked up, you can imagine that there's going to be a lot of gaps and things between them, and water would be able to flow through quite easily. Our next size group are the silts. And silts, if sand is a beach ball, silt is a bit more like a tennis ball. So much, much smaller. And if we imagine a whole bunch of tennis balls stacked up in a box, there's not quite as much space between them. They fill in a lot more of that space. So water can still get through, but it takes a little bit more time. Then we've got the clays. Now our clays, if silt is a tennis ball, clay is a bit like, well, not that end of the pin, that end of the pin. So clays are like the tip of the pin, really teeny tiny. So if we can imagine a bunch of little particles, the size of the head of this pin, all stacked together, there's not much room between them. They can pack together really, really tightly. And that means if we pour water through it, it's going to take a lot of work for that water to get through. It's going to hold on to that water really, really well. So if we want to grow a crop in a soil that's going to hold on to a lot of water, something with a lot of clay in it is going to be great. If we want to grow a crop which needs really good drainage, something with more sand or silt is going to be better for that. So why don't we have a look at how our own soils compare with how much sand, silt or clay is in them. And to do that, we can make one of these, which is a sediment jar. And if we have a nice close look at our jar, we can see there's actually 3 different layers in here. So we've got a really thick layer at the bottom there that's a bit speckly, and this is all our sand. And the sand particles here are actually so big we can see each individual grain, and that's why it looks a little bit speckly. We've got lots of different sand-sized minerals in here. Above that is a slightly darker layer, and this is all our silt. And this is where it starts getting too small for us to see it. And then that really light, thin layer at the very top there, that is our clay. And you can see we've still got a lot of our clay floating in the water that's in this jar. So this gives us an idea of how much of each of those mineral groups are in a particular soil sample. And I'm going to show you how to make one of these now. So we'll need a few materials. First thing we need is a jar with a lid. And we need to make sure that A, your jar is see-through, because otherwise there's not much point. And B, that the lid is watertight, because we're going to be shaking this up and we don't want the water getting out. We also need, well, some water, oddly enough, and a soil sample. So this is one that I've collected earlier. So our soil sample, it looks a little bit clumpy there, but once it gets wet, all of those clumps of soil are going to break apart into those individual sand, silt and clay components. So, I'll let you pause here to go and grab all this material, and then I'll meet you back once we're ready to do the experiment. Okay, now that we've got everything we need, what do we need to do? Step 1. We need to half fill our jar with our soil sample. Now we only want to half fill it, because when we shake it up, we want a little bit of space for everything to move around and sort itself out. Next thing we need to do is just fill it all up with water. Now we can see the water slowly trickling down through all of those gaps in between those big clumps of soil, and we'll see it bubbling a little bit as all that air escapes. So what we'll probably have to do is give it one quick shake to start with, and then just top up the water. So we can see there's a bit more space in the top of the jar there now. So we'll just top that up. Move these out of the way. Okay, and then we just shake it up like it's a can of Coke we want to explode. Yep, I wouldn't want to open that later. Okay, so what's happening here is all of the sand, all that really big sand, it's quite comparatively heavy, is going to sink down to the bottom first. After that, all of the silt, which is a little bit lighter because it's a bit smaller and a little bit more buoyant, is going to settle down on top of the sand, and the clay, which is really teeny tiny, is very buoyant, takes a long time to settle down out of that water, and so that's going to be settling there. Oh, it's still going to be in the water for a little while after we shake it up. So after a minute or two, we'll start to see those layers really clearly forming. The water's going to be quite cloudy if your sample is anything like mine. If you've got a lot of clay, this could take a couple of hours, or maybe you'll need to leave it overnight. But what we can see happening is it's starting to develop now. There's a slightly darker layer forming just here where my finger is, and that bottom section down there is a bit more brown and speckly. So we're able to see how much of each of those different sized mineral components are in our soil. And the reason that we'll get different mineral components comes down a little bit to how the soil formed. If it's just rock that's broken down, the different components are going to reflect what the rock was made of. If you are collecting soil from, for example, a riverbank, you're going to have sediment that's been transported down the river and redeposited, so you'll get a bit of a mix of different soils forming there. So give that one a go, see what's in your soil, and we'd love to hear how everything goes. We'll see you at the next one.